The hum of the Academy's atmosphere regulators was the only constant sound in Rin Calder's world. It was a low vibration that settled beneath the skin, a reminder that the asteroid on which they lived and studied was not a home, only a fragile imitation of one. Beyond the glass corridors, the stars burned in silence, indifferent and infinite. The Asterian Academy floated on the edge of the Heliath system, a place where the ambitious came to touch the future and the unworthy were quietly erased. Rin was not supposed to be here. He was the charity of a foundation that loved to boast of diversity while keeping its human students hidden in the shadows. He sat in the back of xenobiology lectures, surrounded by scales, feathers, and glimmering cybernetic eyes. The air smelled faintly of ozone and disinfectant. The Dragonkin students spoke in a language that clicked and vibrated, their voices carrying a deep, resonant timbre that made his bones ache. He listened more than he spoke. Every answer he gave was a careful construction of correctness, trimmed of emotion, because one misplaced tone could make the room colder than space itself. He was sweeping the infirmary when he met her. The infirmary was built like everything else in the academy, sterile, angular, humming with machines older than the students they served. He was not supposed to be in there unsupervised, but the janitorial drones had malfunctioned again, and the chief medic, a crusty cyborg with a malfunctioning voice filter, had muttered that the flesh boy could make himself useful. Rin obeyed. He always obeyed. Until that night. She was sitting near the panoramic viewport, her tail stretched across the floor like a trail of liquid silver, supported by a segmented brace of alloy. Her scales caught the light of the distant stars, refracting them into tiny rainbows across the infirmary walls. Her hands, long-fingered and delicate, were busy repairing a Meddrone's neural housing with a precision that bordered on ritual. The faint scent of ozone clung to her, but beneath it lingered something softer, old smoke, maybe, or the faint sweetness of star lotus oil. He recognized her from the Academy's whispered gossip, the dragon nurse who had once been a warrior. They said she had fought in the War of Ashes, that she had been struck down by a weapon meant to unmake worlds. They said her wings had been burned away and her flight taken with them. They said she had chosen exile among mortals rather than return to her father's court in disgrace. But gossip in Asterian was as thin as the oxygen they breathed. When she looked up, her eyes met his, and Rin froze. They were not eyes meant for mortals. Silver irises, slit-pupilled, shifting like liquid mercury, reflecting back his every flaw and secret. She studied him for a long moment, then said softly, "You're the one who apologizes to doors." He nearly dropped the broom. "What?" Her lips curved faintly. "I've seen you. When the doors close too quickly, you mutter apologies. As if they could feel insulted. Guess I do that sometimes." He wanted to vanish. "Humans," she murmured, amusement lacing her voice. "Still afraid to offend the machines you built." She turned back to the drone, her movements fluid despite the brace that clicked softly as she shifted. He didn't know why he stayed. Perhaps it was because she didn't order him to leave. Perhaps it was the hum of the room, the way her presence seemed to anchor it. He found himself watching the faint glow of bioluminescent veins beneath her scales, the rhythm of her breathing, the sound of tools whispering across metal. "What's your name?" she asked without looking up. "Rin. Calder." "Nira," she said simply. He knew the name before he even processed it. Nira Tal. The nurse. The veteran. The whispered ghost of nobility fallen from the heavens. He felt as if he had spoken with a myth. She finished repairing the Meddrone and sent it gliding away with a quiet command in Draconic, a language like wind over glass. When she rose, the mechanical supports along her tail contracted with a low whir, supporting her weight. She moved carefully, not gracefully, but deliberately. A creature who had learned to live with pain so long it had become another limb. "You shouldn't be cleaning this late," she said, adjusting a sterilizer field. "Someone has to," he answered before he could stop himself. That earned another small smile, quick as a heartbeat. Duty before comfort. You'll die young. I'm trying to graduate first. Ambitious. Their eyes met again, and something in that moment felt unmoored. The academy, the stars, the artificial hum, they all seemed to drift away, leaving only that quiet space between them. Later, Rin would not remember what possessed him to ask. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the way her scales reflected the stars. Perhaps it was the ache of being unseen for too long. The words left his mouth before his fear could catch them. Would you, he began, his throat dry. Would you go to the Galactic Ball with me? It was absurd. Suicidal. The ball was not for people like him. It was for the elite, royals, diplomats, the genetically perfect, the chrome-blooded. Humans, at best, served drinks or carried coats. For a heartbeat, Nira didn't react. The air recyclers hissed softly. Then her expression shifted, not anger, not laughter, but something quieter. Surprise, maybe. Sadness. Do you know what you're asking, Rin called her. Yes, he lied. She tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. You're a strange one. So they tell me. The silence that followed was long enough to make his skin prickle. He wished he could take the words back, fold them into the air, pretend they'd never existed. But then Nira's gaze softened. Very well, she said. If only to see what kind of madness makes a human defy the stars. His heart nearly stopped. You mean? Yes. She turned away, her voice suddenly distant. I'll go. He stood there, stunned, the broom still in his hand, the sterile lights humming overhead. He had no idea that with those simple words, he had just fractured 1,000 years of order, that somewhere, in the imperial halls of Draven Prime, a line of fate had begun to tremble. And in the reflection of the viewport, the stars outside seemed to flicker, as if the universe itself had overheard his impossible question, and chosen not to laugh. The week after Nira's unexpected acceptance unfolded like a waking dream that refused to make sense. Rin felt as if gravity itself had changed, though the Academy's artificial mass regulators held steady at precisely 0.98 standard GS. Every corridor seemed brighter, every face sharper, every whisper louder. A human boy had invited a dragon to the Galactic Ball, and she had said yes. The rumor passed through the station's communication grid faster than light could travel, carried by gossip algorithms and bored students. He became a curiosity, a glitch in the rigid hierarchy that defined existence within Asterian Academy. Some students stared as he passed. Others turned away, scales or synthetic skin gleaming under the corridor lights. The human dormitories, hidden deep in the asteroid's lower levels, were suddenly full of murmured warnings. They'll expel you, one whispered. Or worse. Dragons don't forgive embarrassment. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was, he didn't understand what had happened either. The night she said yes had rewired something inside him. He avoided the infirmary for days, afraid that perhaps she'd forgotten, or worse, changed her mind. The idea of facing her again filled him with equal parts dread and longing. He thought about her constantly. The way her voice had carried that subtle vibration, the light shifting across her scales, the gravity of her presence. And yet, beneath it all, there was the brace that wound around her tail, gleaming like armor and restraint at once. He wondered what it would mean for her to walk into that ball before thousands of eyes, mechanical and living alike. When he finally returned, he found her not in the infirmary, but in the lower hangar. She stood beside an open cargo bay, her wings, or what was left of them, half unfolded beneath a shimmering lattice of holographic projection. The nanofabrication arrays flickered as she adjusted the parameters, building something from light and memory. She didn't look up when he entered. "You're late," she said. "I didn't know we had an appointment. You made one the moment you asked a dragon to dance." She turned, her expression unreadable. The holographic wings behind her dissolved, the filaments of light fading into the air. "If we're going to the ball, I will not crawl." He stepped closer, eyes drawn to the mechanical brace. "You're repairing them?" "Improving them," she corrected. "The Academy's equipment is primitive, but serviceable. I need adaptive servos, neural feedback loops, and the courage to let the pain back in." Her voice was calm, but Rin saw the tension in her movements, the faint tremor when she touched the base of her spine, where organic tissue met alloy. She wasn't merely building an assistive device. She was reclaiming something stolen. He wanted to help, but what could a human boy offer to a dragon nurse who'd seen war and exile? He watched her as she worked, her claws tracing command lines through midair. Light rippled into schematic patterns, data scrolling across her forearm display. The scent of burned ozone filled the hangar, mingled with something like star lotus oil and iron. "Do you know what they'll say?" Rin asked quietly. "They already have," she replied without looking up. "They call you foolish. They call me broken. They're wrong." She paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Are they? You risk your future for a moment of spectacle." "I risk everything." He swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Then maybe that's what makes it worth doing." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, then she turned back to her work. "You speak like someone who hasn't seen how cruel this galaxy can be." "I've seen enough." "Not nearly enough," she murmured. For hours, they worked together. Rin fetched components from the supply lockers, held tools steady while she fused alloy to bone, watched her grimace as the neural filaments reconnected. The faint blue glow of her veins brightened with each pulse, a biological reaction to the pain she refused to show. At one point, she shuddered, her claws curling, and he instinctively reached out, steadying her arm. The contact was brief but electric. Her scales were cool beneath his skin, but the energy running through her body hummed like the core of a reactor. "You shouldn't touch me when the interface is active," she said softly. "Sorry." She didn't move away immediately. Instead, she looked at his hand still hovering near her wrist, then met his eyes. "Humans and dragons were not meant to share this kind of space," she said. "Our ancestors tried. It ended in flame. Then maybe we can start a different story." The words hung there, fragile, impossible. But she didn't reject them. Later, when she powered down the system and the hangar dimmed to its default lighting, she stood taller, steadier. The brace on her tail flexed silently. The weight that had once bent her posture was gone, replaced by something uncertain and dangerous: hope. Outside, the asteroid's orbit drifted into alignment with the Heliath Nebula. Through the hangar's transparent shielding, bands of violet and gold gas rippled across the void. The ball was only 2 days away. The Academy was already draped in banners of light. Projected emblems of every species, every empire that mattered. Humans, of course, had none. As they watched the nebula, Nira said quietly, "The Emperor will attend this ball. He hasn't left Draven Prime in a century." Rin blinked. "You think he'd come all this way for a school celebration?" "It's not a celebration. It's a reminder. The ball marks the anniversary of the Treaty of Fire, a peace signed with blood and fear. The Emperor's presence is a threat wrapped in ceremony." He glanced at her, confused. "You sound like you know him." Her expression didn't change, but her voice lowered to a whisper. "I do." Something in the way she said it made the air feel heavier. The stars outside seemed to fade. Rin wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. When he left the hangar, the corridors were empty. The lights flickered once as the Academy shifted into its artificial night cycle. Somewhere deep within its systems, surveillance drones hummed to life, recording movements, cross-referencing names. His identification tag pinged once, then again, flagged. He didn't see it. He didn't see the silent transmission sent from the Academy's central core to Draven Prime. Subject **** Nira Tall-sighted. Status **** engaged in unsanctioned interaction with human male.
Directive **** await orders. Far above the Academy, a royal fleet began to alter course. The day of the galactic ball arrived like the slow unfurling of a cosmic storm. The Asterian Academy, normally a dull amalgam of alloy and silence, transformed overnight into a cathedral of light. Holographic banners shimmered down the corridors, representing hundreds of species and systems. The air was perfumed with oxygen variants calibrated to satisfy incompatible lungs. Gravity fluctuated subtly to accommodate guests of vastly different physiologies, heavy near the main atrium, lighter toward the vaulted dome where creatures of wing and vapor would drift through air dense with plasma mist. For most, it was an evening of spectacle. For Rin Calder, it was an event designed to expose the limits of what he dared to believe. He stood before the mirror in his small dormitory, dressed in a suit that wasn't truly his. The coat's seams had been mended with synth thread, its lapels frayed in places the patchwork nanofabric couldn't quite hide. A projection tie shimmered faintly at his throat, cycling through muted hues as if embarrassed by its own existence. He adjusted it again and again, knowing it wouldn't help. The reflection that stared back at him looked like a child wearing someone else's dream. When the door chimed, his heart stumbled. The sensor scanned the hallway, revealing her. For a long second he couldn't breathe. Nira stood in the threshold, the lights of the corridor bending around her as though reluctant to touch her. She wore no crown, no armor, no symbol of rank, only a flowing garment of metallic silk that caught every wavelength of light and refracted it into glimmers that hovered around her like a halo. The mechanical brace that once bound her tail had been integrated into the dress itself, a lattice of living metal that moved as gracefully as the original limb might have. From her back extended the faint shimmer of photonic wings, projection arrays that rippled with ghostly transparency, more memory than matter. "Does it look ridiculous?" she asked quietly. "It looks like the stars built it for you," Rin said before he could stop himself. A brief, almost startled smile crossed her face. "Then I suppose it will do." They left the dormitories together, and the corridors seemed to part before them. The journey to the upper dome took them through observation decks where the nebula beyond rolled in soft bands of blue and gold. Elevator platforms ascended through transparent tubes, revealing the full scale of the Academy, the domes, spires, and solar sails glowing against the infinite black. Around them, guests of every shape and element gathered, insectoid envoys shimmering with bioluminescent armor, gelatinous beings from the methane moons of Corin V, and a handful of android diplomats whose minds were older than most planets. Each one paused as Nira passed. Her kind were rare, and her face was unforgettable. The galactic ball took place beneath the starborn dome, a vast hemisphere of transparent alloy that revealed the spinning cosmos above. Music, if it could be called that, rose from the center stage, an orchestration of gravity fields, ionized sound waves, and pulsing light. Every note vibrated in the bones, resonating at frequencies that transcended species barriers. The air was alive with color. Rin felt like a spark adrift in a supernova. Around him glided creatures of impossible beauty and lineage, their garments woven from starlight, their eyes reflecting entire civilizations. Nira moved with a calm that bordered on defiance, the flicker of her wings leaving trails of silver in the air. When they stepped onto the luminous dance platform, a surface of shifting energy that adjusted to each dancer's anatomy, the music shifted, subtly acknowledging her presence. Conversations faltered. It began as a dance, simple and formal. But soon the light beneath their feet pulsed with synchrony to their movements. Rin's hand, trembling, found hers. The neural mesh in her glove registered his human biosignature, adapting instantly, the fabric warming to his touch. She guided him effortlessly, each motion measured but alive, her mechanical tail swaying with liquid precision. When he risked looking up at her, her eyes reflected the stars beyond the dome, and for a moment, he thought the universe itself was watching. But then the silence fell. The music halted without warning. The air pressure shifted slightly, and the dome's lights dimmed until only the central dais remained illuminated. A figure stood there, tall, armored in obsidian, his wings vast and folded like a cathedral roof.
His presence alone altered the gravity fields, and the guests instinctively bowed or knelt. Rin didn't need to be told who he was. The Emperor of Draven Prime had arrived. Nira's movements froze. Her expression was unreadable, but her pulse, a deep, subsonic vibration that only the most sensitive hearing could detect, spiked. The Emperor's eyes, a mirror image of hers, scanned the room and stopped upon them. For the first time, Rin understood why everyone feared dragons. The Emperor's gaze carried weight, a pressure that felt like drowning in molten metal. His voice rolled across the hall, deep and resonant, amplified by no machine. "My daughter," he said, and the word sent a ripple through the guests. The revelation crashed over Rin like vacuum exposure. Daughter. Every sensor in the dome flickered to life. The hovering drones, which had been broadcasting the ball live across the galactic network, caught the moment in crystalline detail, her defiance, his stunned face, the Emperor's rising fury. Nira bowed her head, but not fully. "Father. You disgraced this bloodline." His voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like thunder through empty space. "You consort with prey." Rin's throat constricted. The instinct to flee fought with the impossibility of movement. Around them, whispers spread like contagion. Some guests watched with fascination, others turned away, unwilling to witness what might follow. "Leave him," the Emperor said. "Walk back to me, and I may pretend this never occurred." Nira's eyes lifted, and in them Rin saw something ancient and indestructible, a fire that no chain could hold. "No," she said simply. It was not a shout, but it might as well have been an explosion. The sound echoed through the chamber, magnified by 1,000 feeds, transmitted across systems before the security teams even began to move. The Emperor's wings flared wide, casting long shadows across the dome. The lights fractured into chaos. Guards in black armor descended from the rafters, their weapons shimmering with non-lethal plasma fields. Nira stepped between them and Rin, her tail's lattice shifting into a defensive configuration. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Stay behind me." The first guard lunged. Light bent around her. The next instant, Rin saw motion blur into brilliance, a sweep of her tail, a shockwave that knocked the soldier backward without drawing blood. She wasn't fighting to win. She was fighting to escape. They moved together, weaving through the chaos, slipping through a maintenance hatch that sealed behind them. The muffled roar of pursuit echoed from the ballroom. They ran through the corridors, the air thick with the scent of scorched ozone and adrenaline. As alarms flared red across the academy, Nira slowed, her breath ragged. "They'll come for you now," she said. "For me, they'll send fleets." Rin met her gaze. "Then we run." Her metallic tail flexed once, wings flickering with unstable light. "No," she whispered. "We fly." Outside, the nebula flared brighter, as if the stars themselves leaned closer to watch what came next. The shuttle bay smelled of burnt fuel and nervous metal. Rin's fingers hovered over the control console, slick with sweat, as the emergency thrusters whined softly, echoing through the cavernous hangar. Outside the viewport, the starborn dome glimmered like fractured crystal, tiny sparks of residual energy from the ball's chaos still dancing along the reinforced glass. The academy had erupted into lockdown, its security drones patrolling corridors and docking bays in swarms, hunting for the dragon heir and the human who dared to defy her father. Nira moved with precision, her photonic wings flickering faintly as she adjusted the shuttle's stabilizers with claws designed for healing and battle alike. The mechanical lattice along her tail hummed with energy, interfacing seamlessly with the shuttle's neural guidance system. Every motion was a calculation, a compromise between speed and safety, yet there was grace in it, fluidity born of years of forced restraint, of learning to exist in a body designed for flight but grounded by circumstance. Rin glanced at her, feeling the weight of the impossible situation. "Where do we go?" he asked, voice tight. "Draven Prime," she said without hesitation. The shuttle shuddered as she activated the launch sequence. We need to confront the Emperor before he consolidates control. It's not enough to hide. He blinked. The Emperor? You're talking about a planet-wide fleet, centuries of history, and a throne that has never tolerated failure. You think we can walk in and, what? Ask politely. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes flicked to the stars outside. A distant constellation of defense satellites rotated around the Heliath system, their pulses synchronized to detect even the faintest signature of unauthorized flight. The routes she planned were a lattice of dead zones, gravitational blind spots, and ion cloud corridors designed to confuse sensors. We don't walk in, she finally said. We slip through the cracks they've built to trap themselves. The shuttle shot upward, skimming the edge of the asteroid's gravity well. Rin gripped the console as the thrusters flared, light strobing against the hull. Around them, the hangar doors clanged shut in protest, and a chorus of alarms followed as the Academy's automated defenses recalculated their interception vectors. He had never felt such a combination of fear and exhilaration. Hold on, Nira said, and the shuttle jerked violently. The photonic wings extended fully, shimmering with adaptive plasma fields, lifting the craft in a trajectory that defied conventional physics. Rin felt the G-forces press against him, his stomach rolling as the shuttle pierced through layers of defensive energy fields, each one crackling and fizzing like captured lightning. We'll have to jump through the cold spiral, she said, eyes scanning for anomalies in the space-time distortions. It's unstable. If we miscalculate, her voice trailed off. The cold spiral was a sector of space where gravimetric turbulence and dying stellar remnants created a natural barrier. Even military vessels rarely entered it, and navigation required more intuition than any autopilot could provide. Then don't miscalculate, Rin muttered, fingers tightening on the control panel. A sudden jolt threw them sideways. The shuttle shuddered violently, lights flickering. Rin saw a streak of energy across the viewport, one of the Emperor's patrol frigates, faster than anything in the Academy's hangars. Nira's tail lashed out, interfacing with the ship's external magnetic stabilizers, diverting the craft in a blur of plasma arcs. They dove into the first cloud of ionized gas, the patrol frigate skimming after them, sensors pinging. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, she said, and Rin's stomach hit his throat as the shuttle twisted and spun through corridors of glowing dust. Each motion was calculated, precise, yet terrifying in its speed. The cold void pressed in from all sides, the remnants of dead stars painting their trajectory with spectral streaks. Hours passed, measured not by conventional clocks but by pulses of radiation and shifting gravity wells. Nira guided them with instinct honed from centuries of survival, teaching Rin to anticipate spatial anomalies and gravitational eddies. He learned to read her in ways he hadn't anticipated, the tilt of her head, the subtle shift of her photonic wings, the hum of her tail lattice. Each signal meant life or death. Eventually, they breached the final layer of the cold spiral, emerging into the orbit of Draven Prime. The planet loomed below like a titan, vast cities of polished metal and crystal stretching from equator to pole. Orbital defense grids shimmered faintly, scanning for unauthorized entry. Nira engaged the shuttle's stealth matrix, a combination of temporal displacement fields and refractive energy arrays. For a heartbeat, they were invisible, drifting across the orbital sensors like a ghost. They'll detect us soon, Rin said, voice barely a whisper. I know, she replied. And when they do, her eyes, silver and sharp as meteoric metal, met his. We fight. Not to win, but to survive long enough to make them see the truth. The shuttle descended toward the Imperial docking platforms, moving between orbital towers like a shadow threading through moonlight. Rin's mind raced with questions. What would the Emperor do when confronted with his daughter's defiance? Would Nira's refusal be enough to shift centuries of rigid authority? And what part would he play, a human boy with trembling hands, in this collision of fire, metal, and legacy? As the shuttle slipped past the last line of automated defenses, a massive silhouette eclipsed the planet's surface. A dreadnought, larger than most cities, drifted into orbit, its hull a labyrinth of dark alloy and weapon systems. The Emperor's personal fleet. Sensors lit up as it detected their presence. Neera's hands danced over the controls, tail and wings in perfect synchrony, aligning the shuttle with a maintenance dock on the edge of the station's industrial ring. "We go in quietly," she said, "but if they find us, they won't have mercy." Rin swallowed hard. "And if we can't be quiet?" She paused, looking out the viewport at the rotating planet. The light of Draven Prime glinted off the dreadnought, reflecting in her eyes. "Then we remind them," she said, voice calm but resolute, "that even the smallest spark can ignite the stars." The shuttle hummed as it drew closer to the dock, a fragile vessel in a sea of imperial might. Outside, orbital lasers cut through the vacuum like ribbons of deadly light. Rin braced himself. This was no longer an escape. It was the first step into a war that spanned generations, fueled by courage, defiance, and the bond that had begun in the shadow of a floating academy on the edge of nowhere. And at the center of it all, Neera prepared to confront the father who had shaped her world with fire and fear, while Rin, human and trembling, realized that survival alone would not be enough. They would need to redefine everything the galaxy believed about power, loyalty, and love. The cold spiral was a prison of silence and shadow. Its orbital station hung like a rusting skeleton, tethered to a dead star by cables that hummed with the faint pulse of gravitational energy. Outside, the star itself throbbed weakly, its radiation fractured and chaotic, casting long, jagged shadows across the corroded hull. Rin and Neera entered the station through a service hatch, bypassing the main docking bay, and immediately felt the oppressive stillness of a place abandoned by hope. The corridors reeked of recycled air, scorched metal, and the faint chemical tang of despair. Inmates of every conceivable species roamed the station's lower levels, humans with augmented limbs that had failed them, dragons whose scales were chipped and dulled, hybrids whose very existence defied natural law. Some watched silently from darkened corners, others whispered in languages layered with resentment and fear. Rin's presence drew curious glances, but Neera moved as if the shadows themselves were extensions of her will. Her tail lattice shifted with subtle clicks, her photonic wings rippling faintly to broadcast a presence both commanding and untouchable. They were not here to hide, though. Neera had made the cold spiral her temporary base precisely because the Empire would assume she could not survive there. It was a miscalculation the Emperor would soon regret. She guided Rin through the winding maintenance shafts, every movement precise, every turn anticipating surveillance and patrols. Here, even time seemed suspended, the dead star outside controlling the rhythm of life inside. Rin marveled at how different she became in this environment. The tension of the ball, the glare of nobles, the judgment of an entire academy had been replaced by a quiet authority that seemed almost effortless. She issued commands to the station's denizens with the ease of a natural leader, her voice soft yet imbued with a resonance that demanded attention. They brought supplies. Scraps of fuel, components scavenged from wrecked vessels, and old neural interfaces, and the prisoners responded, eager for guidance from someone who had survived what they could not. Together, they began to transform the station. Neera retrofitted old shuttles with adaptive engines, capable of burst maneuvers and stealth jumps. Rin learned quickly, his hands shaking less with each new connection, each soldered joint, each calibration. The station became a hive of preparation, a hidden fleet slowly coalescing from wreckage and willpower. The gravity simulators were realigned to train combat maneuvers, and ion cannons long thought inoperable were brought back to life, their barrels humming with latent potential. But even as they built their defenses, the Emperor's reach was close. Transmission intercepts revealed that fleets were mobilizing, a wave of patrol vessels and assault frigates converging toward the cold spiral. The Emperor's intelligence units were efficient, ruthless, and relentless. Every calculation Rin made, every projection he input, was measured against their potential response. Fear was constant, but it became a tool rather than a chain. The station's inhabitants, initially wary of the dragon and human duo, began to rally. Neera did not merely command, she inspired. Her history, whispered stories of war and exile, became legend among those who had none. Rin, too, found a voice he never thought he possessed. He coordinated sensor arrays, managed communications, and, in moments of quiet, simply listened. Their partnership was unconventional, improbable, yet it grew into something neither had anticipated: trust. One night, as the dead star outside pulsed weakly, Rin watched Nira from the command deck. Her photonic wings reflected faintly on the viewport, casting ghostly patterns across her metallic silk attire. She traced constellations that no one else could see, recalibrating engines and shields with the meticulousness of a surgeon. "They'll come for us soon," he said, his voice barely above the hum of machinery. "They always do," she replied. "But not all battles are meant to be fought immediately. Some are won with patience, preparation, and the courage to act when the moment is right." And then the alarm sounded, a low, rolling tone that reverberated through the station structure. Patrol vessels had entered the edge of the cold spiral, sensors locking onto the faint traces of their modified shuttles. Rin's stomach nodded, but Nira's expression remained calm, her eyes reflecting the starlight beyond the viewport. "They'll underestimate us," she said. "They always do. That's why we survive." The station shuddered as distant blasts echoed across the void. Outside, tiny flashes of plasma indicated the first engagement, ships testing the perimeter defenses. Nira activated the ion cannons, their barrels glowing as energy surged through ancient conduits, the sound a low rumble that resonated in Rin's chest. He adjusted sensor calibrations, intercepting patrol communications and feeding them back to her. The interplay was seamless, a dance of calculation, instinct, and courage. Hours stretched into cycles. The patrols were relentless, yet the cold spiral's labyrinthine architecture, combined with Nira's strategic foresight and Rin's quick adaptation, allowed them to repel each assault. Each victory, though minor, sent ripples of hope through the inmates. Those who had believed themselves abandoned began to rise, moving with purpose, coordinating repairs, and preparing contingencies. In one quiet moment between assaults, Rin asked, "Why did you choose this place? Why the spiral?" She looked out at the dead star, its pulsing light reflected in the control panels. "Because they will never think to look for us here. Because it reminds me that even in death, there is energy, there is potential. We can forge something new from what others discard. And because," she said softly, glancing at him, "I trust you." The weight of her words pressed on him, more binding than any chain. For the first time, he realized that the rebellion they were building was more than a fight for survival, it was a chance to redefine what it meant to resist, to hope, and to belong. And as the station hummed with the quiet power of preparation, Rin understood that the cold spiral was not a prison. It was a crucible. And from it, a force unlike any the Emperor had ever known was emerging, born of metal, blood, courage, and the impossible bond between a human boy and a dragon who refused to bow. The cold spiral glowed faintly as the first tendrils of the Emperor's dreadnought fleet emerged from the outer corridors of dead space. Each vessel was a monolith of obsidian alloy, bristling with weapons and layered armor designed to crush the unprepared. But the station had become something alive under Nira's hands. Retrofitted ion cannons pulsed with energy, gravity wells shifted to disorient pursuit ships, and every corridor was a choke point mapped with near-perfect precision. The inmates who had once cowered in the shadows now moved with purpose, their loyalty no longer enforced by fear, but earned by the presence of someone who had endured what they could not. Rin stood beside Nira on the command deck, his hands steady on the console for the first time in weeks. Sensors flickered as the fleet approached, and he guided defensive arrays with precision. The station shuddered as distant ion blasts cracked against their shields, and plasma flares illuminated the dark hull in harsh, violent pulses. For a moment, the cold spiral seemed like the eye of a storm, still and silent, while the chaos raged outside. "They'll never anticipate the path I've prepared," Nira said, voice calm but edged with steel. "They think this station is weak, abandoned. They think it is just a grave for lost creatures. But it is our crucible, Rin. And crucibles burn brightly before forging the strongest metals. Rin glanced at her photonic wings, now fully stabilized, casting ethereal light across the deck. Then let's make them burn. With a faint hum, the station's engines activated. Nira had rigged the orbital pylons to create artificial gravity currents, bending the dreadnought fleet's approach. Rin monitored the calculations, feeding dynamic corrections as the massive ship struggled against the sudden shifts. The first dreadnought, massive as a city, began to falter, its weapons misaligned and firing blindly into the empty void. Target their command nodes first, Nira ordered, her claws dancing across the control interface. We disable the fleet before it can bring the full weight of the Emperor down on us. Rin input the commands, activating the retrofitted ion cannons. Beams of concentrated plasma lanced through space, striking the dreadnought's critical systems. Explosions blossomed in the void, illuminating the station and casting the cold spiral in stark relief. Shards of metal tumbled past them, harmlessly diverted by the station's magnetic shields. Even as the battle raged, Nira's mind was elsewhere, tracing the trajectory that would bring her to her father. The Emperor would not intervene directly while his fleet was crippled. It was a test of control, of fear, of obedience. But Nira had long since shed obedience. The confrontation was inevitable, personal, and necessary. The shuttle bay's emergency hatches opened, and Nira led Rin into a stealth fighter she had repaired with adaptive shielding and enhanced thrusters. They threaded through the chaos of the outer station docks, past disabled patrol vessels and drifting wreckage. Rin's hands gripped the controls, eyes wide as the stars themselves seemed to bend around their flight path. "They'll detect us soon," Rin whispered, scanning for the Emperor's flagship, larger and darker than any of the others, floating like a sentinel above the planet's equator. "They won't detect intent," Nira said. "They see ships, not courage. They calculate risk, not defiance." The flagship's sensors pinged. The shields flared, lasers tracing their course. Nira adjusted her thrusters, weaving the fighter through precise gravity wells she had calculated in advance. Rin realized that every movement was part of a greater plan, each choice a statement of strategy and trust. They breached the flagship's outer hull via a maintenance port. Inside, the corridors were silent, cold metal reflecting the faint glow of emergency lights. Servos hissed and turbines thrummed, but no guards came. Nira's stealth systems rendered them ghosts among machines. They reached the Emperor's throne room. It was massive, the architecture a brutalist geometry of black alloy and plasma-lit panels. At the center sat the Emperor, taller and more formidable than any legend could have captured, wings folded like dark sails, eyes that burned with ancient, immovable authority. "Nira," he said, voice a low resonance that shook the floor. "You defy me for this, human. For this, boy." Rin's hands clenched involuntarily, but Nira stepped forward, her photonic wings fully deployed, casting an otherworldly light across the chamber. "Yes," she said. "Because fear is not loyalty. And love is not weakness." The Emperor rose, a tide of shadow and power. "You cannot stand against me." "I already have," she replied. Her tail lattice extended, striking a control node along the floor that sent a surge through the flagship systems. Lights flickered, servos shuddered, and alarms screamed. Rin followed her lead, targeting structural nodes with precision. The massive vessel began to fracture, its interior convulsing as ion bursts tore through critical junctions. The battle within the flagship was chaotic, violent, yet precise. Nira moved like a storm made flesh and metal, Rin coordinating with her, anticipating the fluctuations in energy fields, distributing power to keep their pathways open. Finally, they reached the Emperor's core chamber. He stepped toward them, wings unfurling, and the room was filled with the roar of potential energy. Nira faced him, her voice unwavering. "This empire will not be ruled by fear alone. And you will not dictate who I love or what I defend." A pulse of energy erupted from the core, but Nira's brace and her wings absorbed it, channeling it outward in a controlled discharge. Rin guided the remaining energy nodes, redirecting power to stabilize the chamber and prevent total collapse. The Emperor's form flickered in the residual light, and then, finally, he faltered. The dreadnought fleet outside, disconnected from their command signals, drifted inert in orbit. Below, Draven Prime cities reflected the soft glow of the dead star and the disrupted shields, witnessing the change that had begun above. Nira turned to Rin, and for the first time, she allowed herself to breathe fully. "We survived," she said. "No," Rin replied, voice shaking with awe. "We won." The Emperor was defeated, not through brute strength, but through defiance, strategy, and the bond that had begun on a floating asteroid far from the heart of power. Nira and Rin descended from the flagship, returning to the cold spiral, the station now quiet but alive with new purpose. The exiled, the forgotten, and the broken had been given a chance to rise. Outside, the stars shone with clarity. Nira's photonic wings spread wide, reflecting nebulae and starlight across the station's hull. Rin, human and trembling, realized that the impossible had been achieved, not through destiny alone, but through courage, trust, and a defiance that remade the cosmos in its own image. And somewhere in the uncharted darkness, two figures. One human, one dragon, rose together, a new constellation born of love, rebellion, and the unyielding will to change a galaxy.